Have you ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet? Not from an earthquake, but from the slow, creeping realization that your own body is no longer the reliable servant it once was? It's a terrifying moment many of us face. What happens when the hands that built a life, that held children, can no longer be trusted to carry a simple cup of coffee? Hello, I'm John from Texas in the United States, your friend who tells real stories. Stay with us until the end of this incredible story. Want to see your story told here? Get in touch with us. This is the story of Arthur, a man of 78, who had always defined himself by his strength. His home was his kingdom, a testament to a life lived on his own terms. He was a rock, a man who never asked for help, because in his mind, needing help was the first chapter of defeat. But life, especially in old age, has a way of turning the page whether we are ready or not. For Arthur, that turn came with a single misplaced step on the stairs. The fall wasn't dramatic, but the consequences were a fractured wrist and a deep purple bruise on his pride. His children, filled with a love that was laced with fear, descended upon his kingdom. Their verdict was unanimous, and, in Arthur's ears, it sounded like a death sentence. He needed senior care. This is a difficult moment in any family. The children believe they are ensuring safety, while the parent feels their independence is being stripped away. Have you ever been on either side of a decision like this? Who do you think is right? Share your perspective in the comments. The decision had been made for him. He protested, of course. He insisted he was fine, but his arguments were met with loving but firm resistance. They saw a vulnerable father. He saw the dismantling of his very identity. 2 weeks later, a woman named Sarah arrived at his door. She was kind, with gentle eyes and a smile that was meant to be reassuring. But to Arthur, it felt like the smile of a warden. She was the physical embodiment of his new reality, a constant walking reminder that he was no longer deemed capable of governing his own life. The very concept of senior care felt like a quiet invasion. In the first few weeks, Arthur fought back with passive resistance. He would forget she was coming and make his own messy, one-handed breakfast. He would refuse her help with tasks he could clearly no longer do alone, like buttoning a shirt, only deepening his sense of impotence. He saw her patience not as a virtue, but as a professional tactic, a calm sea waiting to swallow the last islands of his independence. His children called, asking if he was adjusting. He would grunt a non-committal, "It's fine," the words tasting like ash in his mouth. How could he explain that the issue wasn't Sarah, but the crushing weight of what she represented? This internal battle began to manifest physically. A profound loss of strength started to settle into his bones. A weakness that had little to do with the fall. It was the weakness of a spirit giving up. Why bother trying to regain his full mobility when Sarah was there to fetch whatever he needed? The muscles he had maintained through a lifetime of activity began to atrophy from a lack of will. And then the insomnia began. The darkness of his bedroom, once a sanctuary, became a courtroom where his failures were put on trial. The ticking of the grandfather clock now sounded like a countdown. He would lie awake for hours, his body aching with a fatigue that his mind refused to surrender to. The silence of the house was deafening, amplifying his thoughts. He thought about his late wife, Martha. What would she think of him now? He thought about his children, their love now feeling like a cage. The long, sleepless nights began to bleed into his days. He was perpetually tired, his temper short, his world shrinking to the four walls of his living room. He started to question everything, including his faith. He had been a man who attended church every Sunday, who believed in a loving God, but now, in the suffocating silence of 3 a.m., he would ask the darkness, "Where are you, God? Have you forgotten me too?" Arthur's question in the middle of the night, "Where are you, God?" is one so many of us have asked during a dark time. How does your faith handle moments when God feels distant or silent? Let's talk about this below. The absence of an answer was the most terrifying silence of all. He felt utterly and completely alone, adrift in the final, lonely years of his life, with no map and no stars to guide him. His strength was gone. His independence was a memory, and sleep, the one escape he craved, was a shore he could no longer reach. One night, as the clock struck 4, he felt a despair so heavy it was physical. He swung his legs out of bed, the floor cold beneath his feet. He couldn't lie in that bed for another minute, listening to the accusations of the clock. He shuffled into the living room, the moonlight casting long shadows across the furniture. His eyes fell upon the bookshelf, a place he hadn't truly looked at in months. And there, on the second shelf, tucked behind a collection of history books, he saw it. The worn, leather-bound Bible that had belonged to Martha. He hadn't opened it since she passed. He didn't know why he reached for it now. Perhaps out of sheer desperation, a final, hopeless plea to a God he was no longer sure was listening. His fingers, stiff and weak, trembled as he pulled it from the shelf. The leather felt soft, familiar. He sank into his armchair, the book heavy in his lap, a relic from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He didn't know where to start, what to look for. With a sigh that carried the weight of all his sleepless nights, he simply let the book fall open, his eyes scanning the page without real focus, not expecting to find anything at all. His gaze fell upon a passage in the second letter to the Corinthians, words that Martha had underlined with a delicate pencil line so many years ago. It read, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." The words didn't thunder in his mind. They landed quietly, like a single snowflake on a frozen lake. Weakness. For his entire life, Arthur had treated weakness as the enemy, a plague to be avoided at all costs. His identity was forged in the fires of self-reliance. He was the one who provided, the one who fixed things, the one who stood strong while others leaned. And now, here in this ancient text, was an idea so foreign, so utterly counter to his entire existence, that it felt like a riddle. Power made perfect in weakness. It made no sense. And yet, as he sat there in the pre-dawn stillness, the phrase began to echo in the hollow spaces of his heart. He thought of his own frailty, his trembling hands, his dependence on Sarah for the simplest of tasks. He had seen it all as a humiliating failure, a stripping away of his worth. But what if, he dared to think, what if this perspective was wrong? What if the stripping away wasn't the end, but a different kind of beginning? This idea that power is made perfect in weakness is so countercultural. We're often taught to hide our vulnerabilities. Do you believe that admitting weakness can actually be a source of strength? Share your thoughts on this powerful idea. It was a thought so revolutionary it almost frightened him. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night, but something had shifted. The tormenting thoughts of his insomnia were still there, but now they had a challenger, a tiny glimmer of a new question. He reread the verse over and over, letting the words wash over him. When Sarah arrived that morning, punctual and cheerful as always, Arthur looked at her with new eyes. For the first time, he didn't just see the uniform of senior care. He saw a young woman, probably with her own struggles and worries, who treated him with a consistent, unwavering kindness. He noticed the gentle way she placed his breakfast on the table, the care she took in arranging his pills. These were not the actions of a mere employee. There was a deeper compassion there that he had been too proud and too angry to see. As she was clearing the dishes, he did something he hadn't done before. He spoke first, his voice raspy from disuse. "Sarah," he said, and she turned, a little surprised. He couldn't bring himself to mention the Bible just yet. It felt too personal. He remembered she had been reading a small book herself the other day. "That little book you were reading," he started. "Is it poetry?" Sarah smiled. "No, Arthur. It's my Bible. I read it on my break. It helps me." The honesty of her answer disarmed him. "It helps you with what?" he pressed, genuinely curious now. She paused, her hands still. "With the hard days," she said simply. "It reminds me that my own strength isn't enough, and that it's okay. It reminds me that there's a strength that comes from God, especially when we feel weak." There it was again, that word, weakness. But from her lips, it didn't sound like a judgment. It sounded like a shared human experience. Sarah's simple, honest faith had a huge impact on Arthur. Has there ever been a time when a conversation with someone about their faith changed your own perspective or gave you comfort? Tell us about that experience. A door had opened in his mind. That day, instead of sitting in his chair and stewing in his own resentment, Arthur asked Sarah to bring him the Bible. He spent the afternoon not just reading, but searching. He didn't follow any plan. He simply let his fingers guide him through the thin, delicate pages. He found the story of Job, a man who lost everything but never lost his faith. He read the Psalms, recognizing his own cries of despair and loneliness in the ancient verses. For the first time in his life, he wasn't reading the Bible as a collection of rules or distant histories. He was reading it as a collection of stories about people who had suffered, who had doubted, and who had somehow, through it all, found a connection to God. His insomnia didn't vanish, but its nature changed. The long, dark hours were no longer a torture chamber of regret. They became a time of quiet contemplation. He would lie in bed, the house still, and think about the passages he had read. He started talking to God again, but his prayers were different now. They were no longer the proud, confident prayers of a man who thought he had all the answers. They were quiet, questioning conversations. He would ask for understanding, not for a miraculous return of his physical strength. He would ask for peace, not for an escape from his circumstances. He began to see that his loss of strength wasn't a punishment. It was perhaps an invitation to discover a different kind of power, one that wasn't rooted in muscle or independence, but in humility and faith. He started to understand Jesus, not as a figure in a stained glass window, but as someone who had embraced ultimate vulnerability, who had found power not in ruling but in serving, not in dominance but in love. This shift in perspective began to change his interactions with the world. He started to see his children's phone calls, not as checkups on a liability, but as genuine, if sometimes clumsy, expressions of love. They were worried because they cared. His need for senior care wasn't a mark of his failure, but a testament to their love for him. And Sarah became his friend. He started asking her about her life, her family, her faith. He learned that she was raising 2 children on her own, and that her quiet strength came from a deep and abiding belief in God's grace. He saw that she wasn't just his caregiver. She was a fellow traveler, a person also navigating the complexities of life, armed with her own faith. The house began to feel less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. He found comfort in the routine, not because it was his, but because it was shared. The sound of Sarah preparing lunch became a sound of companionship. One afternoon, Sarah found him sitting by the window, the Bible open on his lap, a peaceful expression on his face. "You seem different today, Arthur," she said softly. He looked up at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "I am," he said. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm not fighting anymore." The battle wasn't against his age or his weakness or even the senior care he so resented. The battle had been against himself, against his own pride. And in surrendering, he was beginning to find a new kind of victory. That evening, his son called, ready for the usual strained conversation. But instead of the curt answers and underlying frustration, Arthur's voice was calm. He asked about his grandchildren, about work, about the small details of his son's life. At the end of the call, just before hanging up, Arthur paused and said something that stunned his son into silence. "David," he said, his voice clear and steady, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. For Sarah, you did the right thing." The silence on the other end of the phone was heavy with a mixture of surprise and relief. For the first time in months, David heard his father, not the resentful patient, but the wise, thoughtful man he had always known. That single thank you was more than just politeness. It was a bridge being rebuilt over a chasm of misunderstanding and fear. From that day forward, the atmosphere in Arthur's home transformed. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. The routine of his senior care was no longer a symbol of his dependence, but a comforting rhythm that structured his days, freeing his mind for more important work. It's amazing how a simple, heartfelt thank you can rebuild a bridge. Have you ever experienced a moment where a few simple words completely changed the dynamic of a family relationship? Share that beautiful story with us. The insomnia didn't disappear entirely, but its power was broken. When he found himself awake in the deep of the night, he no longer saw it as a curse. He saw it as a gift of quiet time, a private chapel for his conversations with God. He would reach for Martha's Bible, its pages now soft and familiar, and read not out of desperation, but out of a genuine hunger for wisdom. He found a strange companionship in the stories of the old prophets and apostles, men who had faced their own lions, their own prisons, their own moments of profound weakness, only to find their faith magnified. His relationship with Sarah blossomed into a true friendship. He began to look forward to her arrival, not for the help she provided, but for the conversations they shared. He asked about her children, her church, her dreams. He, in turn, started sharing his own thoughts, the insights he was gathering from his nightly readings. One day, he told her about the verse that had started it all, the one about power being made perfect in weakness. "I spent my whole life running from that word, Sarah," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought strength was about what I could do with my own two hands. It took me nearly 80 years and a broken wrist to understand that true strength is about what you do when your hands are empty, about what you hold on to when you have nothing left but your faith." He realized his story, his painful journey through the loss of strength and the darkness of insomnia, wasn't just his own. It was a story that many old-age people lived in silent desperation. The very senior care system that was designed to help could inadvertently strip away a person's purpose, leaving them feeling like a ghost in their own life. He saw it in the faces on television, heard it in the hushed complaints of friends he spoke to on the phone. And in that realization, a new purpose began to smolder within him. Arthur decides to turn his personal pain into a public ministry to help others. This is such a powerful act of faith. What do you think is the best way to share our wisdom and life lessons with others in our later years? He, Arthur, the man who resented needing help, decided to become a source of help for others, not with his hands, but with his words. With his story, he started by having a long, honest conversation with his son, David. He explained the profound loneliness and loss of identity he had felt, not to lay blame, but to build understanding. He talked about his anger, his pride, and the slow, painful journey back to peace through faith. He saw tears well up in his son's eyes, tears of understanding and relief. The wall between them crumbled completely, replaced by a new, more profound respect. But Arthur knew his message needed to go further. He asked Sarah for help with something he never thought he'd use: his late wife's old tablet computer. With her patient guidance, he learned how to navigate the internet. He found online forums for seniors, church groups on social media, and websites like Bible Gateway, where he could explore scripture more deeply. And then he began to write. At first, it was just short comments on other people's posts, sharing a word of encouragement or a relevant Bible verse. But then he started writing his own story, piece by piece. He wrote about the fear of falling, the shame of needing help, the terror of sleepless nights. But he didn't just write about the darkness. He wrote about the light he had found within it. He wrote about the power of Jesus to meet us in our suffering, to understand our weakness, because he too had been vulnerable. He wrote about how gratitude wasn't just about thanking God for the good things, but about finding God in the hard things. His posts, raw and honest, began to attract attention. Other seniors responded, sharing their own stories of struggle and faith. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way," one person wrote. "Your words gave me hope," wrote another. Arthur, the man who had felt so utterly alone, was now the center of a growing community. He had found his new purpose. It wasn't in fixing things or being the strong one. It was in showing others that it was okay to be broken, because it is in the broken places that the light of God truly shines. Arthur's home transformed from a prison into a lighthouse. It's a beautiful metaphor. How can we make our own homes, or the homes of our loved ones, places of light and hope for others? His life found a new, gentle rhythm. His days were filled with reading, writing, and connecting with his newfound friends online. His conversations with Sarah were rich with shared faith and mutual encouragement. His physical strength had not returned to what it once was, but it no longer mattered. He had discovered a strength that was infinitely more powerful, a strength made perfect in weakness. His home was no longer a prison, but a lighthouse, and he, its keeper, was sending out a signal of hope to others navigating the same stormy seas of old age. The story of Arthur reminds us that our worth is not defined by our physical strength or our independence. It teaches us that even in the face of loss, illness, and the inevitable weaknesses of old age, a new and profound purpose can be found. It shows that sometimes we must lose who we thought we were to become who God truly intends for us to be. If this story touched your heart, if you recognized a piece of your own journey, or the journey of someone you love in Arthur's story, please support our channel by leaving a like so that more people who need this message can find it. And subscribe to Stories Beyond 50 so you don't miss our next story of hope and resilience. And now, we truly want to hear from you. The comments below are our community's sacred space. How has your own faith, your own belief in God or Jesus, helped you navigate the most difficult chapters of your life? Have you ever felt a profound sense of loneliness? And what, or who, was the light that helped you through it? Your story, your wisdom, is a precious gift. Please share it with us. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing a long story, but you believe in the power of faith to heal, just write the single word faith in the comments so we can all feel the strength of our shared belief. We read every single comment because you are the heart of this channel. Thank you for being here. May God bless you, and we will see you in the next story.